Hi, friends. Your teacher and friend of mine, Mrs. Schweitzer, told me that she was reading some bedtime stories for you, and I asked her if it would be all right if I did a little reading for you. My name's Philip Davis, Mr. Davis. I'm a fourth grade teacher, and I am also the author of Peppermint Lightning, which I understand you have read and spent some time spreading the spark on your own. So, if you don't mind, tonight I'd like to read to you from chapter 1 and part of chapter 2 of Peppermint Lightning. At the top of the hill, at the end of the driveway, up a flight of stairs, and through the last door on the left, there was a girl, 9 years old, named Sydney, sleeping snugly in her bed with her favorite stuffed animal. It was a reindeer she called Jillian, and it was warmly tucked under her arm beneath her coziest blanket, which was pulled up under her chin. Jillian stayed in a plastic bin tucked away in Sydney's basement for 11 months of the year. It was only after Thanksgiving that Jillian was allowed back in Sydney's room. The young lady practically waited all year to see her friend again. When bedtime came around on that first night out of the bin, Jillian got 11 months worth of hugs and cuddles, all packed into the few weeks that she'd be upstairs. Jillian wasn't the only thing that had come out of the basement that day. The boxes full of twinkle lights, the totes full of wrapping paper, the trays full of ornaments, the bags full of wreaths, the stacks of sweaters, the Christmas sheets, the Christmas dishes, the Christmas towels, the Christmas candles, all of it. It was part of what happened in her house the weekend after Thanksgiving. It was Sydney's favorite weekend. She enjoyed eating turkey, and she liked seeing her grandmother and grandfather and all her aunts and uncles and cousins. But what she loved more than anything was seeing all that stuff come back out of the basement and get put back in various places around the house. Jillian had been the first thing out of the first box, and as soon as she saw him, Sydney grabbed him, ran to her bedroom, and tucked him right into bed to keep him warm. Sydney lay sleeping quietly. Mom was off in dreamland down the hall next to a slumbering dad. The house was silent, but for the occasional quiet hum of the furnace kicking on to battle the steadily decreasing temperature. The scents of sugar cookies and peppermint from the candles that had been laid out in the living room and dining room downstairs were starting to drift slowly to the second floor. It was a serene, peaceful night. Then a snowman hit Sydney's bedroom window with a thud. Rather, a snowman's head hit Sydney's window. The rest of the snowman was below on the lawn, but its head definitely smacked into the window of Sydney's bedroom and then promptly had fallen back to the ground. Then it happened again and again. The fourth time the snowman's head hit the window, Sydney heard it. Well, she heard something. She certainly wouldn't have guessed it was the head of a snowman, but she heard something. It had been loud enough that it woke her. Sydney sat up in bed and looked around. Had the cat, Meatball, jumped on the bed? No, the door was closed. Was the wind howling? She listened. No, it seemed to be calm. She sat in silence, a little bit scared, and listened again, hoping not to hear the sound of anyone walking around her house in the middle of the night. She held Jillian tight, held her breath, thought about how long the hallway seemed between her room and her parents'. Then something hit the window. It startled Sydney so badly that she let out a squeak and nearly squeezed the stuffing out of poor Jillian. It had been white. It was white and round, and she'd only seen it for just a second before it fell away from the window, but it seemed like it had buttons. It was white and round and had what might have been buttons on it, and it hit her window. Sydney thought about it for a moment longer, then curiosity fueled her bravery, and she crept out of bed and over to the window. She was prepared to scream if she had to. She was prepared to run to Mom and Dad and yell for help if the situation required. But she was determined to have a look. Sydney crept to the window, slowly pressed her face against the glass, and looked outside. There was nothing flying through the air. There was nothing in the tree, whose branches were just a few yards from the window. There was nothing hanging from the window itself. No, there was just a snowman, a reindeer, and a gingerbread man standing on the lawn with an elf. The snowman was cocking its arm back to throw its own head. You might ask yourself, what is the right reaction to an event like this? What is the proper and appropriate thing for you to do if you're a 9-year-old girl living in Pleasant, Ohio, standing in your pajamas, staring out a window that you can only infer was just struck by the head of a snowman? What is the right reaction to a snowman who, having just hurled its own head, is now standing in the company of a large antlered quadruped, a cookie, and an elf, and is even now in your lawn about to toss its own head against your window again? I don't know what you might do, but what Sydney did was nothing. She stood stock still and stared. Her mouth hung open. Her eyes were as big as Christmas morning. She barely even breathed. She inhaled. It looked as though she was going to suck all the air from the room. Any parent knows that when a child draws in that much air, the next thing following Newton's third law involving equal and opposite reactions is that something must come back out. For most children, this results in one of three actions: Mom, Dad, or a primal scream without any words, one capable of shattering glass. Sydney was old enough not to simply scream without words. No, what was to come from her open mouth, what siren-like call was to issue from her, from the very bowels of her being, and vibrate in her throat like an angry minor chord out of an out-of-tune piano, was likely to be a summons for one or both of her parents. It never came. In a rare instance of the scream interrupted, Sydney was stopped. The reset button was pressed, and she was now back to standing agape, staring out the window silently. Just as she'd been about to scream for her mother and father, the elf, who had just moments ago been standing on the lawn, was hovering outside her window, tapping on the glass, with a finger to his lips and a pleading expression on his face. A pitiful, pleading expression stopped Sydney cold. She leaned in closer to the window. Turned out the elf wasn't hovering at all. No, in fact, the reindeer the elf was astride was hovering. The reindeer was hovering, and the elf was standing on its back, tapping on the glass. Sydney cocked her head to one side. The expression on the elf said that Sydney was not in any real danger. She didn't need to scream for her parents out of shock or fear. She was considering shouting for them in excitement, but that too seemed like the wrong thing to do now that there was an elf at her window, pleading with its finger to its lips for her to be quiet. When it became evident that Sydney was not going to scream, the elf lowered his finger and let out a visible sigh. It stared back at Sydney, and with at least as much pleading as it had demonstrated for her to remain quiet, crooked its finger at her and beckoned her closer. Sydney took a step towards the window. The elf leaned in a little further. Sydney took another step. She was now standing within arm's reach of the window. The curious creature astride the reindeer leaned in and placed his hand on the glass. He looked Sydney in the eye and said, "Please, may we come in? We really must speak to you." I, was all Sydney could say. "I know it must be strange. I know you're confused, maybe scared. Maybe you think you're dreaming. You aren't. We're really here. We're really here, and there's an emergency we believe you can help us with. Please may I come in so we can speak?" Sydney just stared a moment. Then she furrowed her brow and squinted a bit. She hadn't considered this might be a dream. She pinched herself. She felt the pinch. Not a dream. "I can help you?" she asked. "Yes, we're almost certain of it." Sydney did some quick math in her head. The elf had shorter legs than she did. She could probably outrun it if it meant her any harm once in the bedroom. The reindeer's antlers would never fit through the window, and the cookie and the snowman were still down below in the yard. It was probably safe. It was most likely safe. It was probably safe, and there was an elf at her window asking for help. An elf that she figured probably knew Santa. Sydney opened the window. Thank you so much," the elf said, slightly squeaky, sing-songy voice, as he climbed over the sill and lowered himself to the floor in front of Sydney. He turned back to the window and said, "Go and bring back Chester, please." The reindeer dropped in front of the window in a flash and returned with what Sydney was sure was a gingerbread cookie on his back. "May my friend enter too? He can help tell you the tale that we need to tell you." Sydney had not calculated for a cookie, but he was adorable. He was an adorable cookie who was standing with his little cookie hands clasped in front of him, waiting for an invitation. "Okay," she said, figuring a gingerbread man wasn't likely to bring her much harm if things went badly. "Thank you, miss," said the cookie with a deep bow, and then he turned to the reindeer and said, "And thank you, my friend. We shall call you when we have conducted our affairs. Please wait with George, would you?" The reindeer nodded its giant antlered head and descended. The cookie, whose name she now presumed was Chester, hopped down and stood beside his companion. Sydney closed the window. "Thank you again," said the elf. "My name's Emmett. I'm an elf. This is my friend Chester. He is a gingerbread man." Emmett stood about 3 feet high. He wore a heavy burgundy coat with wide brim, fur trim at the collar, and cuffs. He had a matching hat with a small pom-pom at the end. He seemed to be in forest green leggings that were hidden mostly by the length of his coat, and those leggings ended in red and green boots pointed to match his slender ears. Chester was quite a bit shorter than Emmett, 8 inches tall at the most. He was rich brown color from head to toe, with bright white frosting where the cuffs of his pants and sleeves of his shirt would be, were he wearing such things. He had buttons down his front that seemed to be raisins, a thin licorice pair of lips, and eyes that were either M&Ms or Reese's Pieces. Altogether, he looked delicious and smelled a little bit like molasses. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance," said Chester, repeating his bow. "I'm Sidney." "We know," said Emmett. "You're the one we came to see." "Oh, right. That was Baxter. She's a reindeer from the north. The snowman you see below, the one who got your attention, his name is George." "George?" asked Sidney. "Yes, George," said Emmett. He and Chester shared a brief glance. "Who names a snowman George?" "We know. It does seem an odd name, but he gave it to himself. Please don't mention it. He's very proud of it. He thinks it's kingly, presidential, academic." "It's silly," Sidney said. "Please don't ever say that to him," Emmett begged. "I won't. Now, to the business at hand," said Chester. "We haven't got a great deal of time. Indeed, as I mentioned, we've got an emergency, and we think you can help us with it. And you know what the emergency is, and I hope that you continue to spread the spark. I hope you enjoyed listening to a little bit of Peppermint Lightning. Enjoy the rest of the stories that Mrs. Schweitzer has for you, and do well in school.